saying, well, the book is a great book, the story is a great story, the characters are great, but it's unfilmable, and it is unfilmable. If you were to just shoot the book page by page, scene by scene, it would just be a mess.
Unfilmable. That is what Peter Jackson, the creator and director behind the Lord of the Rings trilogy, said about the very story he was attempting to film. So how did it get to be what we know it as today? The Lord of the Rings is widely recognized as the greatest film trilogy of all time. The films won over a dozen Oscars, grossed billions of dollars, and set a new standard for cinema not just in the fantasy genre, but across all filmmaking. And one would think, of course it should. It's a story that has already stood the test of time, even becoming the second best-selling book of the 20th century, right behind the Bible. So where did Peter Jackson's apprehension come from? Why was this such a daunting task for a filmmaker? Well, for those of us who have actually read Tolkien's original masterpiece, you already know the answer. You see, the original story took place over 1,500 pages. The average screenplay? Only 120 pages. But here we are, 25 years later, and the Lord of the Rings trilogy is celebrated around the world. So what happened? Well, when adapting the books to a screenplay along with Fran Walsh and Philippa Boyens, Peter Jackson had to make some sacrifices. And while many fans got upset that anything was cut from Tolkien's original work, I think it's important to acknowledge the fact that without these omissions, the films wouldn't have even been possible. So in today's video, I'm going to reveal the 4 most important changes that Jackson and his team made that at the time would have been considered detrimental to the story, but ended up turning this 1,500-page unfilmable epic into a cinematic masterpiece. My name is Gibby, and welcome to Factor Fantasy, your one-stop shop for everything Tolkien. Just a reminder, if you like these videos, please subscribe as that greatly helps out the channel. Now before we dive into the meat and potatoes of these changes, I have to give a massive disclaimer. If you've been on this channel for a while, you know that I did a series called Movies versus Manuscripts, in which I found every single change between the books and movies. And there were literally hundreds of them. I'm a book purist at heart. I love the poetry, I love the slow world building, and I think the books are superior as they are the original. But today, we aren't looking at the bad changes, we're dissecting the strategic ones, the ones that took a literary myth and translated it into the language of cinema. As always, I want to give a huge shout out to Jason, Joshua, Timothy, Robo Steve, and all my Patreon and YouTube members for helping to make these videos possible. And an extra special shout out to our newest member, Alexander. Now grab a cup of tea and maybe a pipe if you're feeling particularly hobbitish, and let's dive into what made this unfilmable story a generational piece of cinema. In the book, The Fellowship of the Ring has a very different sense of time. After Bilbo's long-expected party, there is a massive 17-year gap before Frodo actually leaves the Shire. 17 years. In that time, Frodo lives a quiet life. He turns 50, and he eventually decides that it's time to move. In the world of literature, this is great. It emphasizes the slow, creeping nature of the shadow in the east. It shows that evil doesn't always arrive with a bang. Sometimes it's a gradual decline that takes decades to manifest. But in a movie, a 17-year gap is a death sentence for your pacing. Cinema is a medium of momentum. Jackson and his writers realized that for a movie to work, the audience needs a driving engine, a reason to stay in their seats for 3 hours. You cannot tell the audience the world is ending and then show the main character waiting around for nearly 2 decades before he decides to go for a walk. By removing that gap, Jackson turned the story into a ticking time bomb, which, despite its incredible length, keeps people captivated. The moment Gandalf realizes what the ring is, the Nazgul are at the gates. This creates immediate urgency. The threat isn't a distant historical footnote, it's a terrifying shadow right outside the window. This acceleration forces the characters into action, making the stakes feel immediate and personal rather than academic. But the bigger impact of this change is the hobbits themselves. In the book, Frodo is 50 years old when he sets out. He is essentially the uncle of the group, the wiser of all of them. Merry and Pippin are significantly younger. In Hobbit years, Pippin is essentially a child, still in his tweens. If Jackson had stayed faithful to this, the power dynamic would have been a little skewed. You'd have a middle-aged man leading 3 children into the woods. By aging them up, or rather aligning their ages, Jackson created a band of brothers. Elijah Wood's Frodo looks like he belongs with Sean Astin's Sam and the others. They aren't a group of younger cousins following an elder, they are a peer group. This is vital for cinema because it allows for a more relatable form of masculine tenderness. When they are all young and vulnerable, their interdependence feels more earned. We see four friends facing the world together, learning together, and failing together. It transforms the story from a guided tour into a true coming-of-age journey. This change also solves the visual continuity problem. If Frodo is 50 but the ring makes him look young, you have to spend a lot of time with clunky exposition explaining that to the audience. You'd have characters randomly commenting about how well-preserved Frodo is, which distracts from the action. By just making him young and keeping the journey moving, Jackson kept the focus on the emotional stakes, the loss of innocence for four young men who have never left home. Now we have to talk about the change that still makes some fans' blood boil: the omission of the Old Forest and Tom Bombadil. I love Tom, and I love his yellow boots, his nonsensical songs, and the fact that he is a complete enigma in Tolkien's world. He is a fantastic literary device that shows there are things in Middle-earth that simply do not care about the great power of the ring and cannot be explained. However, from a screenwriting perspective, Tom Bombadil is a disaster. I mean, just look at how he was handled in Rings of Power. But anyway, the movie has just spent a half hour establishing that the One Ring is the most dangerous object in existence. It corrupts everything it touches, it is the literal soul of a Dark Lord, and then our heroes walk into a house where a guy in a blue jacket puts the ring on, laughs, makes it disappear, and then hands it back totally unaffected. If you're just a casual viewer who hasn't read the books, you're thinking one thing: why don't we just give the ring to that guy? Or better yet, why are we even worried about this Sauron guy when good old Tom over here in the Old Forest can just juggle around his most prized weapon as if it's a toy? Introducing a character who is immune to the villain's primary weapon in the first act of the movie completely kills the tension. It's what we call a narrative cul-de-sac. You go in, you have a weird time, and you come out exactly where you started with zero plot progression. In a 1,000+ page book, you have space for these atmospheric detours. In a movie, every scene must either move the plot forward or reveal something essential about the characters. The Old Forest and the Barrow Downs are world-building pit stops that don't serve the ring's destruction. To include them, you would have to add on at least 45 minutes to an already long movie. You'd have to introduce the Old Man Willow, explain the Barrow Wights, and then explain why Tom won't just walk the ring to Mordor himself. It creates a massive logic gap for the audience to bridge. By cutting this, Jackson maintained the narrative momentum. The hobbits leave the Shire, they are pursued by Black Riders, and then they get to Bree. The threat remains constant. The ring remains dangerous. Jackson realized that in a movie, you can't have a lullaby in the middle of a chase sequence. As much as it pains me to lose this section, it was the right call to keep the audience's heart rate up and the story's stakes intact. And I've made much longer videos about this as well, talking about the Barrow Blades, Tom, and the Old Forest, so check out those links in the description for a much longer explanation of all of this. But at the end of the day, I think Peter Jackson made the right decision to remove Tom Bombadil's chapters from the story completely. One of the things Tolkien does masterfully in the books is world building through side characters. He populates his world with people like the Grey Company, Gonbury Gon, and numerous lords of Gondor like Prince Imrahil. These characters give the world a sense of immense scale. It feels like a real world with real politics and countless moving parts. And Tolkien had no problem handing important lines or plot details to characters who only appeared in a single chapter. And I love that in the book. But movies have what we call a character economy. A film audience has a limited amount of emotional bandwidth. Every new character you introduce is a character that you have to explain, develop, and give a satisfying conclusion to. If Jackson had introduced the 30 Rangers of the Grey Company in The Return of the King, he would have had to take time away from Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli to explain who they were, where they came from, and why we should care about them. In a movie that already has multiple protagonists across 3 different locations, adding 100 more named characters would have turned the film into a confusing blur. For example, everyone loves Prince Imrahil in the books. He's like another Aragorn, and that's exactly the problem. We're conditioned to look at Aragorn as the ultimate guy, But how would it have felt to arrive at Minas Tirith and meet a guy who's essentially just as cool? It would take away from Aragorn. The reason it's okay in the book is because that progression and character development is built out over many chapters, and so we understand it better. But in the movie, we wouldn't have had time to dive into Imrahil properly, and he would have been ruined. Ultimately, Jackson's philosophy was simple. If a hero needs to do something, let it be one of our heroes. This is most evident in the Paths of the Dead. In the book, Aragorn is accompanied by the Grey Company and the Sons of Elrond. That's over 30 people. It turns the adventure into a military maneuver. In the movie, it's just the 3 hunters, Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli. By keeping it focused on them, the audience feels the weight of the danger more. We just spent 9 hours with these 3 guys, so when they walk into the mountain alone, we are scared for them. If they were surrounded by 30 nameless rangers, that intimacy kind of goes away. The stakes shift from will our friend survive to will this group of people we just met succeed? And the same thing goes for removing Gonburi Gon. While his role in helping the Rohirrim bypass the Orc army is a cool bit of lore, it's another complication in a movie that's already juggling 5 different plot lines. Every minute spent on Gonburi Gon is a minute taken away from the internal struggle of Theoden or the bravery of Éowyn. By streamlining these elements, Jackson ensured that the Fellowship remained the heart of the story. It prevents the movie from becoming a military simulation and keeps it a personal journey. It makes Aragorn's transition to king feel like a personal triumph shared with his 2 best friends, rather than a political maneuver supported by a sub-faction of rangers that we just met. It keeps the camera on the faces we love rather than the scale of the map. Finally, we have to talk about the big one, the change that Tolkien himself would have likely been most saddened by, which is the removal of the Scouring of the Shire. In the book, after the ring is destroyed and the king is crowned, the hobbits return home to find Saruman has taken over their homeland. They have to lead a rebellion, fight a battle, and eventually watch Saruman be slain outside Bag End. Tolkien used this to show that you can't go home again, that war touches everything, even the most innocent places, and it's a full circle moment when we watch the hobbits recover the Shire. It shows that they've grown into warriors capable of defending their own borders. But in a movie theater, this is almost impossible to pull off. We just watched the literal Eye of Sauron explode. We saw the mountains crumble, the King of the Dead find peace, and the heroes get rescued by eagles. That is the climax with a capital C. In cinematic terms, that is the peak of the mountain. If you then ask an audience to sit through another 40 minutes of the hobbits fighting a much smaller, less threatening villain in a bunch of fields, the energy of the film evaporates. You are essentially asking the audience to climb a second, much smaller mountain right after they've reached the summit of Everest. It's what we call a double climax. From a structural standpoint, the audience's emotional journey ends when the ring hits the lava. Everything after that is resolution. Jackson understood that The Return of the King was already pushing the limits of an audience's patience with its multiple endings. Endings that are necessary to say goodbye to specific characters. Adding the Scouring of the Shire would have pushed the movie past the 4-hour mark in the theatrical cut, and it would have felt like a sequel tacked onto the end of a finished story. It would have confused the casual viewer, who thought the war was over when the big bad guy died. And while it might be hard to believe for a lot of us book fans, there were millions of people who learned about The Lord of the Rings through the movies, so they would have been thrown way off if the Scouring of the Shire suddenly popped on at the end. So instead, Jackson moved Saruman's death to the beginning of the 3rd movie in the extended edition and focused the ending of The Return of the King on the Grey Havens. By doing this, he shifted the Scouring's theme of loss and recovery into the characters themselves. When the hobbits sit in the Green Dragon at the end of the film, they are back in their home, but things are clearly not the same. They don't fit in anymore. While everyone else is celebrating their simple, unaffected lives, our 4 hobbits share a silent look of profound shared trauma. They've gone on an adventure and returned alive, but very much changed. This conveys Tolkien's message about the cost of war, with much more cinematic efficiency. It allows the film to end on a bittersweet note that prioritizes the emotional resolution over the political one. It's why people still cry at the Grey Havens 25 years later, because the movie focused on the happy sad parting of Frodo and his friends rather than the logistics of Shire politics. It makes the ending feel like a sigh of relief mixed with a sob, which is exactly the tone needed for an epic of this scale. So where does this leave us? Does it mean that Peter Jackson fixed Tolkien? Absolutely not. You cannot fix a masterpiece. But Jackson did something much harder. He translated it. Tolkien wrote a mythology for England. He wrote a story that was designed to be lived in, meditated on, and studied like history. It's a book that invites you to wander off the path and look at the flowers. Jackson created a cinematic experience. He had to build a tower, to use Tolkien's own metaphor, so that we could look out at the Sea of Middle-earth. To build that tower, he had to use the stones of Tolkien's work, but he had to arrange them in a way that wouldn't fall over under the weight of a 3-hour runtime. Jackson had to be the steward of the story's soul, even if he had to change its body. He had to recognize that what works for the eye of the mind while reading a book is often different from what works for the eye of the camera in a dark theater. These 4 changes, the aging of the hobbits, cutting Bombadil, streamlining the cast, and removing the scouring, are the pillars that held up that tower. They provided the narrative momentum and the emotional focus that allowed a 1,500-page unfilmable epic to win 17 Academy Awards, and more importantly, to capture the hearts of millions of people who might have never picked up the books otherwise. So what do you think? Is there a change I didn't mention that you actually think benefited the film more? Or are there parts of the book that you can never forgive Jackson for cutting? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this analysis of the Impossible Translation, be sure to like and subscribe, and check out my Movies vs. Manuscript series if you want to nerd out over every single change between the books and movies. Also, you can check the description for other cool videos about Tom Bombadil, Saruman, the Scouring of the Shire, and much, much more. Other than that, have a great week, and I'll see you in the next video.